This session is the second in our series of Flow360 online surgeries that anyone is free to join in with, to ask questions or to learn more about Flow360. We're going to start this session with a look at some of the recent enhancements and changes in Flow360 in the most recent releases. And we're going to start with a look at bookings and events management. The start screen that you are currently viewing is that of a manager. And there are a couple of things I'd just like to point out. You can see some buttons there for bookings and also accommodation and also lettings. This is part of the series of changes that we made recently in regard to managing these different types of bookings and events. And it allows you essentially to separate out accommodation, which we would classify as residential houses or flats that are rented out or leased to internal staff. And it allows you to separate those out from lettings, which are effectively the same thing, leases or lettings of, again, flats or entire houses or rooms to external agencies or personnel. And those, of course, both differ somewhat from bookings, which we categorize as those things which are short-term, very often less than 24 hours, and cover things like room bookings and day events. So we're going to start with a look at the bookings side of things, where we've made some fairly big changes in terms of how you can manage bookings and how you can manage the service requests that are linked to a booking. And we're going to start by looking at an existing booking that we've already got set up. And this is for a series of meetings. On the bookings record itself, the main bookings record, we can see on the Details tab the overview of what's happening in this entire series of meetings. So meeting Series A, and we can see we've got a number of different dates. There are 6 separate dates, all scheduled to start at 11:30 and finish at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And underneath that, we can see an overview of the service requirements that were logged when this event was put together. So this covers catering, coffee and biscuits, and some lunch options, along with some costings for the catering service items, some general service requirements, including some car parking spaces, table layouts, audience chairs, and some ICT service support in the form of a data projector and screen. On the bookings record, on the services tab, what we will see is the individual service requests that go along with the support service requirements for this particular event. So because we have specified that we want support from ICT, we want support from general portering services, and of course we have some catering requirements, those 3 separate service requests have all been generated as separate requests to the individual service areas, individual service managers. And if we use the Go To button here to click through to one of those service requests, you can have a look and see what that looks like. So this is the catering service request, which of course just extracts from the overall overview that we were looking at previously, just the catering requirements. And you can see on the record for the catering service request that this is linked back to a booking. And there is a button, obviously, to take you back to the main bookings record. And that ensures that each service area manager understands what else is going on as part of this booking, part of this event, who else is involved, what are the other service requests that are involved in ensuring that this event happens. Now, what we've added to all of this is the facility to edit those service requests after they've been created, particularly with a view to thinking about a series of meetings like this one, where your catering requirements might, of course, vary from one week to the next. and indeed things like car parking spaces required and so on, are likely not to be identical for every meeting in a series of 6 meetings. So next to the details overview, we've got some edit buttons here on the right-hand side. And if I want to start editing, say, the catering requirements for this particular booking, then I can click on the edit button here. And first of all, this just confirms this is one of a series of dates. And it asks the question whether I want to update the requirements just for this single instance or for this and all future instances and resources in the series. So that allows you, for example, to have a series of 6 meetings, and from the 3rd meeting onwards to make some change to the requirements. So if you went then to the 3rd meeting in the series and click the edit button, you could then say, I want to change the requirements for this instance and all future instances after this one. And we can do that by clicking the all button at this point. So if we do that, the next question is, what do we want to do? Do you want to edit the event details text, or do we want to edit the service requirements, or indeed, do we want to add in some new service requirements that we don't currently have? I'm just going to use the edit option for this, this particular demo. So we'll click on the edit, and now I need to confirm which of the 3 currently included service areas is the one that I want to edit right now. So I'm going to select the catering options and click the edit button. And that now presents me with a dialog with all of my pick list options that are available for the catering requests. And perhaps I wanted to add in some drinks service requirements. So I'm simply saying, yeah, we need additional drink services here for 6 people. So I'll add those in and click on the confirm button. And this brings us through to an important consideration, which is also a new addition in Flow360, which is that certain service requirements will have a minimum notice period required in order for them to be accepted. And in this case, because I'm making a change with too little notice, it's telling me, actually, you can't do that for this particular meeting. So I would have to, at that point, cancel out of that one. This meeting, as you can see, is imminent, this particular session, and it's basically telling me that I can't edit the requirements for this one because it's already too close to the time where this one is going to occur. So let's move forward a little bit in time in the series, and we'll go to the 4th session, which is not happening until the 6th of May. And we're going to change the catering requirements for that single date. So now again, I hit the edit service requirements button, and I'm going to choose the single option and then edit and then catering and edit again. And then we're going to add in those drink service options and click confirm. That's absolutely perfectly fine for this one. And that has allowed me now to add in the drinks service, which you can see has here now been added to the overall summary of the requirements for this particular instance. If we go to any one of the other dates in the series, so this was instance 4 is the one we're looking at here. If we go to any one of the others, let's look at instance 5, and we can see the drinks service option that we just added in to the 4th instance is not visible for the 5th one quite correctly. So if we go back to the 4th one, what we'll also see on the services tab is that the catering service requirement has been updated as well. So we can see here refreshments drink service has been added into the catering service requirements. And indeed, what will also have happened behind the scenes is that a new message has now been sent to the catering service manager or the catering service team, confirming that the catering service requirement was changed, and of course linking the team or the recipient of that message back to the catering service request so they can review the detail of that. All of that ensures that everybody is kept fully up to date. You'll notice on the catering service request itself, there's also the same edit details button. So we could even on a single request for a single service for a particular date go in and edit the details and then trigger additional messages and updates to everybody so that everybody knows what's going on. Pretty much the same process is involved in adding new service requirements as well. So if we went back to the booking and the overall details, and we're looking again at instance 4 at the moment, the other option I have here is that we can add in new service requirements if we want to. I'm not going to do that now because the process is basically the same, but it allows you to add new requirements to an existing booking, and then of course to notify the relevant service area manager, and of course to notify all other people involved in organizing or managing aspects of that particular event, keeping everybody up to date with what is going on. So one of the things that came up when we tried to do the first edit there was that minimum notification period requirement. And I just wanted to have a little look at where that is set up. There are actually a couple of different places where that is set up. One of them is in the main manager or service area management preferences. So as a manager, if I click on my preferences button down here and I go to the services tab, I can see here minimum required advance notification for new help desk service requests. And at the moment, that's actually currently set in this case for 1 week. So obviously we can set that to whatever time frame we want. 1 week seems a little excessive. But each service area manager can set this minimum requirement as a global default for all service requests that relate to their specific service area. So that's one way of doing it. That's a sort of global way of doing it. The primary manager has that same overriding option. So if a particular service manager has not set up the requirements specifically, but the primary manager has, then the primary manager's minimum notification period will take precedence. There is another area where you can set those up and you can fine-tune those requirements a little bit more precisely. So if we go to our sites record and we look at our standard tasks tab and go to the service requirements on the standard tasks tab, one of the other things you might notice here is that there is a new option here of minimum notice requirement against each of these separate pick list items that can be included on service requests. So if we filter this list down just to look at the catering services only for a minute, so I might say, okay, in order for us to be able to put a lunch together, we need minimum 4 hours notice. For a dinner, we might say, actually, we need a little bit more than that because we need more time to get that ready. Whereas a packed lunch, if you tell us within an hour that we need a packed lunch, that's probably fine. And similarly for packed teas and so on. So having set the minimum notice requirements up for each of these things, if I then go and start creating a new, in this case, catering service request, so let's come down here to catering services, and I start picking these options from my list, if I select an option from this list here and then specify a date and time up here for the event, and that doesn't give sufficient notice for one or more of the requirements I've selected from the pick list, then I get that warning dialog that you saw earlier. And that ensures that service areas can really ensure that they get enough notice from staff for requests for services, either just single services like this as a catering service request. And the same thing, of course, applies, as you've already seen, if you have service requests that are linked to an event, that are linked to a booking, and you start adding in new requirements, but you're not giving enough notice to the service area managers, you will then get that warning, and it will actually prevent you from putting the request through at that time. So if things are really urgent at that point, then maybe you have to pick up the phone and plead with them to supply that service in a sort of specially quick time for you. So that's some of the things that we've added then for events management, for bookings. Let's jog back, because we started just by sort of drawing your attention to the details, the differences here between bookings, lettings and accommodation. And I wanted just to explore a little bit the accommodation side of things, the staff residential accommodation. So if I click on the accommodation button on the start screen, what I get is a list of currently active or pending staff accommodation that's already booked in the system. So we can see we've got 35 Kings Close, 25 Kings Close. We've got a number of residential properties that are occupied by senior staff. And if we click through, of course, to any one of those, then we get the bookings form, but you can see this is a variation of the bookings form that includes things like lease details. So in this case, for 35 Kings Close, we've effectively set up a lease arrangement between King's College and, in this case, one of our members of staff. And we can add in some additional information on the lease details tab. It includes general information about the lease. What type of lease is this? Is this a fixed end date or is it an automatic renewal basis? Does it relate to residential, office, retail, store, building? Obviously, in this case, it's staff accommodation, so it's residential. You can also schedule in break dates and review dates on the lease if you need to, and you can even set alarms against those things so that you get an email notification automatically when the break date or review date is coming due. We can also specify what the next review is going to be, what type of review it is, whether it's open market, fixed rent, index linked or turnover rent. And we can do things like specify whether there is a service charge option that applies to this particular lease, i.e. are there additional charges that relate to the maintenance, either on a fixed fee or a percentage charge basis, and whichever one of those you choose, you can then specify what that fixed fee or percentage is. Two other important additions here are these privileges here that are set in relation to the lease, the access rights. So access with prior notification. This relates to the maintenance team, for example, being able to enter the property if there is prior notification in order to undertake planned maintenance or servicing. And there's a separate control that specifies whether or not the maintenance team have the right of access to the property or unit during weekdays in order to attend to reports of faults that need repair. And those two key bits of information are brought forward and included on help desk issues and works orders. So if someone logs a fault for this particular property, 35 Kings Close, during the term of this particular lease, so that would be from the 1st of May this year until the 1st of May next year. So if there is a fault logged during that period, then this information gets picked up and added through onto the help desk fault report. So if we look at our help desk list, for example, and we look at the staff accommodation, at the moment there's nothing set in here. If we start changing a due date here, so we set the target here for let's say we go for 4 weeks, relevant to current date and time, then we can change the target. Now the point in time when this particular issue was logged didn't coincide with a particular lease arrangement, and therefore at the moment there's nothing being brought forward onto the help desk issue. But those access requirements, access rights will be brought forward. And if we look at a works order relating to one of those lease arrangements, let's go to order number 778. What we can see on the details here for the messages is access requirements. Oh, in fact, on this one, I'm telling a lie. This is not giving you access requirements at all. This is detailing and something else that we're going to look at a little bit later on. So let's just go back to our staff accommodation and let's pick up one of our current ones. So let's go to 25 King's Close, because this is active at the moment from February through to August. You can see we've got these access options here, and we're just going to log a new fault report. We go to King's Close and we'll drill through into the ground floor, room 1, and say, yes, there's a new help desk requirement here and the lights have failed. And we'll set the target to that to 24 hours, because that's fairly critical. We get to see those fixed. And there again, we see we're hitting up on, actually for this particular type of fault, we're hitting up on a minimum notification requirement. We can't do that, so let's push this forward a little bit. And here's an example down here. You can see notified access, weekday faults access, both ticked and added to the help desk issue, so that the person who is dealing with this particular fault knows when they view it that this is residential staff accommodation. They can see who the current occupier is, but they can also see that it's okay for them to enter the property and deal with that particular fault as and when they need to. So those are some of the additions that we've put in. The lettings side of things is effectively very similar to the staff accommodation, in that you have the same sort of access to additional information if you need to enter it in relation to lettings to external agencies or personnel, with the same options for break dates and access rights and for maintenance issues and so on. So that's some of what we've added on that side, bookings, accommodation, and lettings. I want to have a little look now in a bit more detail at what we've added in for standard tasks. We had a little brief look at that a few minutes ago when we were looking at minimum notification requirements for services. But I want to look at a couple of other things that have been added in to editing standard tasks. Now, you may or may not be familiar with standard tasks. A standard task is essentially a predefined standard way of doing things. So an example might be that as an organization, you have a particular method that you want used rigorously for standard room redecorations, for example. And in that case, you might set up a standard task, and the standard task includes a description and possibly a detailed method as well that takes you through all of the steps required in order to complete that task. And on the forms now, when you set up your standard tasks, you can edit these descriptions, you can edit the method as well, and have that stored and have all of that information brought forward onto a scheduled task and then taken forward onto a works order that includes that task. So the basic process in terms of using standard tasks is that you specify what the task is, and you can create your own new ones by clicking the Add User Defined button here. So we would then add in a code, a summary, a description. We can specify whether or not we need to use a form, an inspection form, along with this task. We can specify the work type, units, time needed, and indeed some outline costs, and put all of that together in order to arrive at one of these pre-specified tasks. And then when we go to a particular room, for example, let's do this very quickly. Let's just go to room 106, and let's set up a new redecoration for room 106. So I'm going to go to the Tasks tab, click on the button to add a new task for the room, and instead of filling out this sort of standard quick action task specification, I'm simply going to go to my list of standard tasks, and I can pick up Paint Room Complete, my square meter rate. I confirm these bits of information. So is this a one-time only? No, actually, we're going to say we're going to do this every 5 years. So we'll take off the one-time option. And we'll confirm that and add that in. So simply by going to add a task and then picking a task from my standard tasks list, If I go to the task that we've added and I look at the details, we can see full declaration of room, additional information that we might have put in on the details or methodology, detailed methodology, will have been brought forward onto the tasks record. And that information then is also taken through onto any works order that that task is added to. So let's go back to our standard tasks and just look in again a little bit more detail of some of the other things that we've added in terms of being able to make edits to these standard tasks. So let's have a look at maybe the fire safety check here. So our fire safety check has a standard form attached to it, and this is a standard inspection form that we can edit. On the details, we don't have anything very much at the moment, so we can, if we want to, we've got little edit buttons next to the details and next to the method where we can make adjustments to the text that we include in that. And then if we add detailed information to the method or the description, that information is brought forward to the task as well. In terms of work type, we can specify what that would be, sort of specialist trades that apply to making fire safety checks. We can specify things like whether by default this is a one-time only option or whether it has a standard repeat interval and duration, and we can even put some costs against that if we want to. We can also do things now, which we've not been able to do before, of adding standard inspection forms to standard tasks. So if we set up a new standard task and we forget that actually we really want to have an inspection form added to that task, we can go to any task and there's a button there where we can say add a form to this standard task. And by clicking on that button, I can then pick from one of my pre-specified standard forms, or I can pick up a generic one and I can make my own inspection form on the fly. And we can add that in as a form linked to our standard task. So, item 1, item 2, item 3, I'm not going to spend time now detailing what those things are going to be. But you basically say what you want your inspection items to be on the form. And then when you apply this standard task to a particular object or location, the form comes along with it. And you then have a built-in inspection form that you can use when you're executing that particular item on a works order. So the editing of standard tasks has been significantly enhanced in the latest releases, and that is something you might like to spend a little bit of time looking at in a little bit more detail. We have updated the user guide on standard tasks, and we've also updated the user guide in relation to the staff accommodation options that we were looking at earlier. So do drill through to the user guide and look at the lessons, the tutorials that are in there if you wish to explore those areas in a little bit more detail. A little thing I wanted to show you now, something that we added that just sort of speeds up the day-to-day use of Flow360 in particular situations. Sometimes you find that your help desk list, particularly if you're a manager, begins to get very lengthy. You can end up sometimes with hundreds of issues on your active help desk list. And very often, actually, the ones you're interested in are the ones that have been added most recently, rather than the ones that are sitting around on the list from a while back that are still waiting to be attended to because they're on hold or because we've set the target dates a little bit further forward. So one of the things we've added in is a quick way really just to reduce the clutter a little bit by going through and saying, what do I want to see on my lists? And I've got a new option up here on my personal preferences. And each user can, of course, set this up separately themselves. And in this case, it's saying maximum rows limit in default lists. So I've set that to 50. So that means that when I go to my help desk list, it's going to tell me up the top here, set limited by preference to 50 records. It also tells me that there are more than 50 records that potentially could be shown in this list, and that I should use the find button if I want to see some of the others. So it's just a way of saying, restrict the list initially to the 50 most recent records, because very often when I'm just jumping in and out of the list, what I need to see is the stuff that's been added most recently, and it helps load the list faster by putting a limit on the number of records that I'm displaying. Of course, if I use the find filters and I say just find me everything that's been posted in the last 6 months, then it's going to bring everything through. In this case, so that's 115 records. That then bypasses the default load limit. So you can use that as and when you like to. You can just jump back into your preferences and change the number to something else on the fly as and when you need to, but it will help in terms of day-to-day speed of using the system. So I just wanted one more thing, actually, to go back to standard tasks, because I wanted to have a little look at the fact that you can now add in, on service tasks, things like documents, standard forms. So we've already seen that you can add in inspection forms, but I want to have a look now at adding some documents into a standard task, because what that means is that when that standard task, or in this case, a service requirement, is picked up as part of, for example, a catering request, that any documents that I've linked to the standard task are automatically brought forward onto the service request. So if we have a look at lunches, for instance, standard lunches, I've got various pick list options that I've set up here with some costings against them. But I've also got some documents that I've attached. So these are sort of standard table layouts that I can include as options. So if we have a look at one of those, just a very simple 4-table layout with 8 seats per table. And I've added these table layouts in as options against my standard task for lunches, so that when I make a catering service request, I've got those as reference points, so that I can look at those documents when I'm making the request, and I can add into my notes which particular layout I would prefer to use for this particular catering request. So adding documents into standard tasks, adding forms to standard tasks, being able to make change more easily to the specification of the standard tasks are now all there by default. And one other thing that's linked through to standard tasks on the costs side of things is what happens when you make a catering request or you include some costed services as part of an event. Where do those costs go? And one of the things that we've also added in now is that we will pick up those costs, and they get added in. Here's an example. This is a catering service request, and we've got a new costs field down here, in this case £407.20, and that's been picked up here from the individual elements of the catering service request. So we've got lunches and coffees and main options and mineral waters, and they've all got costs against them, and then we built up from that a total cost, and that total cost for this service request has been brought forward onto the cost requirement for this service. And that could be a service that's just a standalone, or it could be a service request that's part of a larger event. So we're bringing those costs through. We've made some other changes to some of the detail that's added to works orders. Now, some of it links back to what we've just been talking about in terms of standard tasks, and some of it links back to the methodology that we've added, but we've also put in some other options on the works tab lists. So in fact, I'm going to jump to order number 778 just to give you an example of this. And on the order, on the line items tab, we've added in a couple of extra columns here. We've added in some column options to show the quantity and unit of measure for each of the line items in the list. Now, that information was always there. And of course, if we drill through into the line item record itself, and we look at the costs, for instance. The cost tab confirms that there are 4 in number of these tungsten lights that actually we need to pay attention to in relation to this particular works order item. But you had to drill down a little way in order to find that information. So in order to make it a little bit easier and a little bit more immediate, we've added the option to the list view here to specify that the quantity in unit is shown in the list view when you're looking at the tab list. And you may or may not know, but I'll tell you now that this little customize button here, a little customize tool, allows you to specify which columns you want to see in your listings, and this information is retained and stored and will load back up that way the next time you log into Flow360. So if I want to include the quantity and unit of measure in my columns, then I have to make sure that those 2 are ticked. If they're not checked, and I come out of this again, just confirm it, then you can see the quantity columns are not there. So if you don't have those set up currently in your particular setup for this listing, then go to the little customize button, select the quantity and the unit, and click confirm, and it will bring those columns in and it will remember those. And that information is also now included on the messaging and other information that goes out in relation to the order. So if we have a look at the message here that will have been sent from Tim Jones to Prime Maintenance in relation to this order, we can see here on each of the line items, we've also got the quantity and unit. Again, that information was there previously, but not quite so immediately accessible. And this just makes it a little bit more explicit. This is, an interesting example here too of a works order that includes that detailed description methodology attached for each of those line items, the various steps that are involved in undertaking each of these tasks. So that's a few little additions that we've made in terms of ensuring that more detailed information, A, is available to you to edit, and B, that information is, of course, carried forward down the chain from defining a standard task to logging a fault report to scheduling a planned action and then including any one of those things on a works order that then goes out to contractors or the individual internal workforce to undertake. I think that pretty much brings me to the end of the things that we were going to look at today in relation to new enhancements to Flow360 in the most recent releases. I'm just checking back with James, and I don't see any particular questions or requests that cover other areas. So I think we will wrap this session up today. I hope that's been useful to you. Obviously, if you have additional questions and queries, or you want some additional help with any particular aspect of Flow360, do please get in touch with us. We are planning on running these surgery sessions regularly, particularly through the coronavirus lockdowns. It's a useful way for people to be able to spend some time just catching up with where things are, spending a little bit of time perhaps in some online training, and keeping everybody up to speed with what is going on. So stay well and stay safe, and I look forward to seeing some of you online next time.